I wish we had the answer on productivity because I feel like this gets thrown around all over the place. I think that hybrid work is harder than full-time in office work. It requires better managers. The ability to record conversation, distill conversation, turn that into action items, kind of spread that out to a team, like that stuff is going to become really, really important in hybrid and distributed environments. And AI is really well situated to do those types of things.
Hello, heroes of hybrid work. I'm Jenny Mobius and an SVP at Sketa, where I'm lucky I get to help organizations bring their hybrid workspaces to life every day. Part of that mission includes bringing you the latest data and insights from today's top voices, researchers, and business leaders so you can make the best decisions for your business. On today's pod, Rob Sadow, CEO and co-founder of Scoop and creator of the Flex Index, the leading hybrid work research representing 6,500 companies, 45,000 office locations, and more than 100 million people, shares their most recent research on the Fortune 500, as well as some smaller growing companies, are largely voting for flexibility, so why are we having this rigorous debate? He also shares why hybrid work is so much harder for managers, how AI can help us be more productive in a hybrid world, and the biggest mistakes companies are making. Rob, thank you so much for joining us on the Heroes of Hybrid Work. We are very excited to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So what's the story of why you created the Flex Index? It is pretty much everywhere. It is in the journal, it's in Fortune, it's all over my LinkedIn feed 24/7. If you're anybody who's in hybrid work, the index is around. So tell me the story. Why did you start it?
You know, Jenny, I wish there was like a great, really exciting story around it. It's actually a somewhat embarrassing story in terms of like why we started the Flex Index in the first place. So as I mentioned, we build software for hybrid teams, and we ran into this problem maybe about a year ago, a little over a year ago now, where we kind of picked our head up and said, well, which companies are hybrid and in what capacity? And realized that we had no good way to figure out which companies are hybrid. And not only were we really interested in that topic, but job seekers cared about it so they could find companies that matched the level of flexibility that they wanted. Companies were trying to benchmark their policies against other companies in their industry. It was obviously coming up in the media all the time, and a company would change policy and a journalist would ask, is that a one-off anecdote or is that the start of a trend in terms of what every company is going to do? And so we built the Flex Index largely to solve our own problem and started to scrape together company office requirements. And we launched it in February of 2023. So I guess not terribly long ago. And now it has more than 6,500 companies in it across 45,000 plus offices. Those companies employ more than 100 million people globally. And the research, as you noted, on what's happening in tech versus financial services, or in enterprise versus small companies, or in the Northwest versus the South of the US, has been picked up all over the place. And I think we're proud to have shined a lot of light over time on trends in a way that's data-driven, helps people make sense of the world around us.
Yeah, it's incredibly useful information for the rest of us selling hybrid enablement software too, which is awesome. I feel like you are building this incredible community of people who care about making workplaces better for those in this hybrid situation, which is probably most of us if you're a knowledge worker, if you don't need to be in the office or in retail or brick and mortar or something like that. So something really caught my eye. I love the findings on how public companies are more flexible than private companies. I think the Fortune 500 report is actually different than the Flex Index, but related, maybe like an offshoot. So the Fortune 500 have pretty much voted for work location flexibility. Why is this, and why is the debate still so heated? I feel like the verdict is kind of in.
I think there's a bunch there. I'll kind of like unpack it in a few different ways. I think you're right that the Fortune 500 is largely voted for flexibility. We found 82% of Fortune 500 companies are offering work location flexibility in some fashion, right? So most Fortune 500 companies are embracing. I think the debate is heated because it makes for really great stories and people are really passionate about this topic. And every time a company says that they're going to require people to come in more often, people love to write about it. People get really worked up reading about it, and it creates really good stories and eyeballs and clicks, right?
True.
In reality, I think what's happening is there is a set of people who are really, really vehemently supportive of fully remote work, don't understand why anybody would ever go into the office, and they shout from the rooftops about it. And look, I totally get it. Some people are just really passionate about that. On the other side, you've got some really, really passionate CEOs and execs who believe that 5 days a week in the office is the way that they grew up in their career and what made their company great. And if we don't return full time in the office, then people are lazy and we can't perform in the way that we used to. And they shout really loudly about it. And I think we could probably both name folks who kind of like fit into that group. In reality, I think 80% plus of people are somewhere in the middle. They like spending some time together in person. They like spending other time not in person. There are certain activities that they believe are more productive to do together and certain things that are more productive or easier for them to do alone. But that distance between is in some ways less interesting to write about than the fact that there's kind of like zealots on both sides. And so large companies, I think, have largely already kind of moved in that direction. They recognize that there's a balance there. They set some guardrails at the company level, but they give teams some ability to customize that. And frankly, I think that's probably where we're going to be in the future, is some kind of balance in between on both sides.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I also found that 99 of the Fortune 100 also offer hybrid work. So I kind of also I attribute some of the financial performance of these companies to the fact that they were able to adapt. I know it's maybe like a loose correlation, but it does feel like your ability to adapt to the new, ways of work are also contributing to your success. Do you agree with that?
I do. And we did a report in July on job growth that was really interesting. And we basically took our policy data, so policies on flexibility from thousands of companies. We combined it with, there's a company, People Data Labs, that actually puts out pretty good data. And we use their data to look at headcount growth at companies over the last 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and actually found that there was a meaningful correlation in headcount growth based on the number of days required in the office on a weekly basis. And if you were full-time remote, the job growth was fastest. Also because some of the fully remote companies are smaller, but the job growth was fastest. But then 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, 5 day, with a really steep drop off when you went from 3 days to 4 days required in the office and then 4 days to full time. And headcount growth is not a perfect proxy for revenue growth or earnings growth or company performance. But in this market, the companies that are hiring are really hiring because they have confidence in their business model and feel like it's the right decision to hire. It's not a lightly made decision. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, an indication that the companies that are growing, what's actually driving economic return in our economy right now, are the ones that are offering more flexibility. And in my mind, that's probably going to drive the ones that are more full-time in office to feel like they have to adopt flexibility in order to compete with those types of companies.
That's excellent. I love that. I think I missed that study. There's so many of them.
Meet Aria. Aria was just hired as an account executive and has to come to the office 3 times a week. She's an extrovert, likes to talk through problems, and likes a good coffee break in the morning. Aria is nervously approaching her first day in the office next week and feels overwhelmed at onboarding, let alone finding the right place to book a desk. But we can help her out. Using the power of technology, Aria can see the space beforehand, discover what neighborhood is for talkers like herself, and know what days it's available. As a bonus, she can even pick the seat right next to her onboarding buddy, Keith. Whether or not you're using Skeda, make sure you're setting up floor maps and neighborhoods in your system to make your employees feel right at home. Skeda, hybrid work, people first.
Which kind of brings me to the next question, which is, if you could wave a magic wand and give every leader one data-backed insight, which one might just improve everybody's workplace? It's a big one.
The funny one is, like, I wish we had the answer on productivity, because I feel like this gets thrown around all over the place. And There are studies that say that remote workers are substantially more productive. There are studies that say they're less productive. It gets used as an excuse for why people should or shouldn't go back into the office. If I could wave my magic wand, either I would answer it or I would never have another conversation about is one empirically more productive than the other. In reality, my belief is that it varies so much by person and by seniority and by role. And it may be very different based on whether you're more extroverted or introverted or what type of work you do. And so this is the office more productive than out, or is hybrid less or more productive, I think is a bit of fool's gold. And I wish there was some way to just answer it or make it go away.
I couldn't agree more. And I also think the definition of productivity is also up in the air, right? Because if you go into the office and you have an unstructured day and you connect with your team members and you create the culture and the sense of belonging and you kind of recharge your batteries, but you didn't really do much, does that also count? Like, does it make you twice as productive the next day and the next day and the next day? So I have this discussion with my coworkers all the time. I'm like, yeah, you think we didn't get much done today, but think about the power of the connections that we made today that are going to carry us through the next month or the next 2 months. So I would love for there to be more data on that too. I think there's a lot there. All right. So something else that I haven't talked about with many people on the podcast is how should we be upskilling our managers to support new work models? I think this is kind of you have a unique take on this. Like, what are the challenges now for new managers now that, okay, verdict's kind of in, we're in a hybrid work world. You have some remote, you have some on-site, you have some hybrid. What do managers need to be successful, in your opinion?
It's a really important question, and it's a hard one. Maybe to take a step back and talk about it big picture for a second. I think that hybrid work is harder than full-time in office work. It requires better managers. Like, maybe put it a different way, the average manager has to be a better manager in a hybrid world than they do in a full-time in office world. Why is that the case? Well, coordinating that activity and figuring out how to keep a team aligned is harder when you don't see each other every day, every minute. Building relationships and kind of rapport between people is easier generally for most people in person, and it requires a little bit of skill building to do that differently and virtually and kind of build the same strength of relationship. It also requires managers to move away from a terrible management crutch, which is management by walking around or management by observing somebody and thinking that they're working, to managing by outcomes and actually being very clear with the team on what are our goals, what's the time frame in which we're trying to deliver them, having good conversations about that, and using that as the way to understand whether someone is performing well or not just how many hours they spend in the office. And so it's hard on managers, and it is complicated by the fact that executives are generally putting pressure on managers to encourage or push or measure whether employees are coming into the office. Employees are sharing their feedback or frustration around that with managers. And so they get stuck in between also in terms of pure policy and the back and forth in terms of how to think about time spent in the office. And so being a people manager is a hard role right now. And I think a lot of companies are going to have to invest a lot of attention into upskill and training to help them make that transition.
Yeah, no, I understand that well. It also seems that you have to be so much more intentional now. You can't just walk around and, do these drive-bys or make decisions without, bringing the people that are remote into the picture. And I think that is difficult, especially for extroverts who just kind of thrive on those office drive-bys and water cooler conversations. And I feel like you have to be very intentional. And also I think extroverts it's hard for us to do that too, to remember that we made a decision at the water cooler. So yeah, no, I think that's an extremely good point.
You're totally right. And there's also an angle to the manager's role has also shifted, whether you're extroverted or introverted, in a way that requires more, not just intentionality, as you said, which I totally agree with, but also in some ways like documentation. And some people may hear documentation and think, that sounds very bureaucratic or, like low value work, but it's actually not in that sense. It's more okay, well, what was the decision that got made? And I actually need to capture that somewhere in a document or a message because I have team members in different places and we need to be able to remember that in the future. And the conversation that we had for 3 minutes after the meeting ended and only the people who were in the room heard it and not the people who were remote, that can't just go on and assume that everybody's going to have context. That somehow needs to get translated back to everybody in terms of goals or action items or next steps. And so there's a kind of higher quality that's required in terms of how you move through the process of your life as a manager and how you move through work. That's different from when everybody's in the room together and you can just pick up your hand and be like, hey, what was that thing? Or we talked about this for a second, and you tell somebody else, and it's just a different environment that way.
Yeah. I keep thinking about how awesome would it be to have a little AI bot on my shoulder that says, hey, it looks like you kept talking after the meeting. Make sure to write that down. Otherwise, I'm just like, all right, on to the next thing, right? It's, yeah. So actually, speaking of AI, have you given it some thought in how AI plays into, this whole world of hybrid? And, I feel like I have to ask everyone that question. It does seem like it's on everyone's mind. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I do. And I will preface by saying it's so early, right? Like I think even my thoughts today probably will evolve dramatically over the coming years. And just the technology and it broadly available to us is gonna evolve so much. But as I just talked about a little bit, I think that the ability to record conversation, distill conversation, turn that into action items, kind of spread that out to a team, like that stuff is going to become really, really important in hybrid and distributed environments. And AI is really well situated to do those types of things, whether it be summarizing a conversation, taking unstructured data out of a video recording or a phone call and turning it into clear action items, pushing that to different places, reminding. Like, I think that can be a superpower for managers or frankly for any team member in kind of moving through that process more efficiently. And I think it's super, super important. And a couple of data points that are actually not Flex Index driven, but stuff that I read that I thought was like super important on this. I think Microsoft has put out some good research over time on hybrid work and flexible work broadly. And if I recall correctly, I think they found that people were in 3 times as much meetings or as many minutes are spent in meetings as pre-pandemic. And then if you try and localize that, Nick Bloom, the Stanford professor, did in a recent report found that full-time in office and fully remote workers, I think, were spending like a quarter of their time in meetings or something like that. But hybrid workers were spending 50% of their time in meetings. And it's because instead of me tapping you on the shoulder and we chat about something for 2 seconds, like it becomes a 30-minute Zoom and everything becomes a 30-minute Zoom. And so this kind of stuff is going to actually be really, really important to unblock and figure out not just where we spend our time in a hybrid environment, but how do we spend our time in a hybrid environment and making sure that those hours are productive, and AI can be very helpful there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Awesome. All right, so let's jump down to maybe some more examples. You probably worked with a ton of companies at this point to learn about their hybrid models. So what do you think are maybe the biggest mistakes that companies make with hybrid work?
I think the biggest mistakes, and I kind of like bucket them in a few different groups. If I take a step back broadly in terms of the models that we're kind of seeing be put into place, I often describe it as there are 2 different big camps of flexibility that seem to be emerging. There are smaller companies, and I would define small company in the sense as like 500 employees or less, that are very flexible. So the vast majority of them offer work location flexibility. And beyond that, a lot of them give employees choice as to whether or how often to go into the office. That's much more common in smaller companies. On the other side, you have larger companies. And those larger companies typically put in place structured hybrid model. And by structured hybrid, I mean they set a specific expectation on when or how often employees come into the office. And that's more common at kind of like the larger the company you get to. The biggest mistake I find is that larger companies will set a structured hybrid model, but then be specific company-wide on the days. Everybody in the entire company needs to come in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There's a bunch of reasons why that's really silly. One is from a pure like real estate perspective, you get absolutely no real estate efficiency or cost savings on that model structurally versus others, because if the entire company has to be on the same days and you localize it that way, then you need every bit of real estate that you had before.
It's true. Yep.
The second problem is if everybody comes in on the same days, those days just become jam full of meetings. And everybody's in there wall to wall meeting back to back. They become super, super oversubscribed. Everyone's furiously trying to catch up on the other days. And that's just not how organizations naturally operate. Teams have different cadences based on who they work with. You know, for some teams, the right time to get together in person might be a Monday. For somebody else, might be a Thursday based on what our responsibilities are, who else we collaborate with, external stakeholders. And so the big kind of like advice and best practice that I start to see evolving is if you are a larger company and you feel like you need structured hybrid because it allows you to have your arms better around how you think about hybrid work and make some sense of it versus everybody kind of running off in their own direction, which I get, you know, some companies feel that way, allow teams to customize it. So allow teams to come up with their own team level agreements. One of the best practices I've seen, and Brian Elliott, who used to be at Future Forum, writes a lot about this, is around publishing a team level agreement. This is where we work and how we work and our policies, and making that visible not just to the team, but to other teams, so you understand what their practices are. And that way, company can set guardrails, maybe 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever they think is appropriate. Teams can customize their end to kind of like find what works best, and you get some of that flexibility while also having some of the structure that I think larger companies tend to crave.
Yeah, no, I think that is really interesting. I actually spoke to Brian a couple days ago.
Oh, awesome.
But yeah, you both are amazing. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, and then in your data too, you found that larger companies prefer this kind of structured hybrid. So it's almost, you know, I think your advice to them is to kind of go a level deeper and do it by team versus like just like a you know, everybody needs to do it. I think that makes sense. I actually think it might even need to go one step, you know, more, you know, to maybe understand a person's individual needs at times, right? Like you could have a home situation, or you could have, you know, you might need I think it's funny. A lot of people say, well, you could be a mom. I'm like, well, moms want to get out of the house. I don't know about you. Why haven't I heard a mom be like, hey, I need to get out, not be in here. But I think that story has yet to be told.
But I think you're totally right, by the way. And I think a couple things on that. Like any good team level agreement is built out of the individual needs and perspectives of team members, right? So like, this is what my team needs, and this day I need this, and this other day I need that because of things I'm balancing, right? And so team level agreements aren't just the manager saying, this is what I want for my team. It's a discussion that leads to alignment at the team level on how we work. And it can be evolved over time based on what's working and not working. To your point on being a mom, and we're due with our second kid like any day now, right? So it'd be like, you know, thank you very much. One of the things that made me become so passionate about this topic in this world to begin with was when my daughter was born, which was August of 2021. I saw firsthand what it was like kind of going through parental leave and watching my wife go through parental leave and like the experience of that. And there were times running up to my daughter being born where she really wanted to be working from home for a host of different reasons. And then after she came back to work, which was January 22, being able to be remote more often was incredibly valuable to her. Right. And then there came a point where she didn't want to be remote all the time and wanted to be able to be back in the office. And now we're in a different place. And point being, even for the same person, it evolves really meaningfully, even year to year, chapter to chapter in your career, and having the model of flexibility that can allow you to customize that a bit and find what's right for you. I just think it's really, really important.
Yeah. No, I love that. And makes you the most productive, right? It gives you the most productive space that you can, you know, make for yourself. That's awesome. I know we're coming up to time, Rob. What I love to ask as like a final question is there anything that you wanted to say that you haven't said? Is there something that I didn't ask that got that great answer out of you? What do you want our audience to know?
I think maybe a parting thought is, I think the debate on return to office is just overblown at this point. As we talked about a little bit earlier, I think we're going to end up in a world where most companies offer flexibility, probably in the office roughly 50% of the time, 2 or 3 days a week, out of the office 2 or 3 days a week. Employees will find themselves within that in terms of if they want more, they'll find a company that gives more. They want less, they'll find a company that gives less. I think there'll be some right sizing within that, but that's where we're going to be. And one of the data points we look at Flex Index that I think really reinforces that is if you look at company by the year it was founded. And we did some research on across all industries, so not just tech startups, how flexibility varied by when a year was founded. And if you look at companies who were started after 2011, who are in the Flex Index, 93% of them offer work location flexibility. And so even if no company changes its policy from where it's at today, just by time passing and older companies aging out and more new companies being formed who are used to flexibility, we're going to end up in a world where most companies offer work location flexibility. The important frontier that we're on now is less about the where and it's much more about the how. The things that we talked about on how do you train managers, what are the best practices, how do you get the most out of that environment? And the faster that companies and leaders and teams start pivoting toward, well, how do we get this right? And what iteration should we do? And who's figured something out? And let's distill some best practices. That I think is the important frontier that's going to come over the coming years and what's really needed to get hybrid work and flexible work broadly to the place where everybody, companies and employees alike, feel like they can get full value out of it.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much, Rob. So where can people find you?
Yes. If you want to find me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Our research we publish on the Flex Index on our site, so flex.scoopforwork.com. We also have a Substack newsletter where we put out research weekly and blog posts and other things. You can find us there. It's called the Flex Index newsletter. Our Scoop site, where you can find more about our Scoop software, is scoopforwork.com. And then lastly, I do a podcast where I interview thought leaders, operators, academics around future of work. It's called Flex Perspectives. And so you can find that on anywhere where you listen to podcasts, and we write about it in our newsletter as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. The podcaster on the podcast. I love that.